Once again, multiple choice. I've already been told that I should have had a write-in option for someone to write in themselves. We won't say who. This quiz comes from a pretty old curriculum called Build Your Own Theology. So I could have thrown in some process theology ideas and other ideas in there that aren't in it. All right. As you can see, those coming in, there's a quiz there. It's you have multiple choice. If more than one thing works for you, that's great. Can everybody see the quiz? Oh, good. I'm glad. You couldn't see it last week, could you, Jackie? So,
you know what it was? I think I thought it was part of the sign-in thing, and it either I deleted it or it just went by too quickly. This time I was ready for it.
Okay. Yeah, because it is what, like, it does pop up. I can see how you might just click it out of the way without thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like a pop-up ad or something.
Chloe, you're muted.
I just unmuted. Can you put the quiz up again?
Oh, do you not? You can't. You see it?
I don't see it.
Okay. I'm not sure why that happens sometimes. So, and I'm not sure what I can do about it on my end.
Okay. Well, don't worry about it.
I'm sorry about that, because I mean, we did last week it was Jackie, and this, I mean, it's somewhat of a mystery here.
I think the only option you would have, Chris, would be to relaunch it, but I think that would then get rid of everybody's responses. But yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
No worry.
Okay. All right. Has everybody had a chance to do their poll? Okay. The reason I picked this particular poll was just because there's a lot of God language in the Sermon on the Mount and the Bible in general, and it makes a difference how you think of the Word, or what you reflect on the Word. You know, there's moments where is this like, if I do this, will a person punish me, or am I just at odds with the natural flow of things, or however you want to conceive of divinity? So just something to think about. So nobody put person and nobody put creator of the world. And we have so that's, and those are some of the more traditional ideas. So there we go. All right. Now you know where you are. Any thoughts from there? Any tough choices? Or
I wish there was another expression that wasn't included. Of course, I did select a mystery.
Yeah, there you go.
And some sort of creator thing, but I just think it's just beyond belief, beyond understanding, I should say.
Yeah. Somebody got a radio on?
But I do feel very close. I'm sorry. Was I broadcasting some background noise?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I apologize. I didn't know it was loud enough. I'm fascinated with the concept of God and Creator, and I feel like He's been in my life, or it has been in my life so many times, because I've survived so many. I've just had so many miracles in my life that should have taken my life, and they didn't. And sometimes bad things happened, and it just directed me in a different path.
Yeah,
something that somebody else may have, chosen to hate God for, or something. I'm going to extremes, but
yeah.
All right, that's enough about me.
Okay, can everybody got a chance to see the results for all right. Yeah, and another thing you could have put is the word synchronicity, and that's that sense that all things are worked together for the good. That's another one of the concepts that are there. Well, it's obviously a word that can mean many different things, and so that helps us in conversation, because sometimes I think people are. I always say conservatives often say liberals often say we're using different words, but we're talking about the same thing. And conservatives say we're using the same word, but talking about different things. And they're both can be true, and that could be, with especially theological terms. Biblical history so long, like the word sin doesn't mean one thing. There's actually multiple words, multiple things it's meant at different times. And same thing with God. So, I have the opening reading is actually the reading we used from on Sunday, but I thought it was good to hear it in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the words Frederick Douglass used to describe Christianity of slaveholders, differentiating his understanding of Christianity from the Christianity of slaveholding people. He said, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. To love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ, I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. So I read that in part just for the same reason I read the Native American looking at Christianity from a native angle. This is a way to realize that a lot of what the Christianity of the land isn't necessarily what Jesus was talking about. That's what
Chris?
Yep.
Can I interrupt for a second, please?
Yes.
This survey is stuck on my screen.
Oh, I don't see. That's a mystery. I think I've exited it. Does anybody else see it? Now, do you see it?
I had to push the close. I had to push the close button to get it off my screen.
Okay, you should have an X in your top corner that you can click it to turn off. Do you see it?
Not yet, but let me put on some glasses.
Okay.
That could work.
That'll help.
Close. Oh, wait a minute. There it is. Thank you.
All right.
It was turned sideways, and I didn't learn to read upside down vertical.
There we go. Last week we mentioned how Unitarian Universalism comes out of the wisdom tradition, and which is if it's something is wise, you can take it no matter where it comes from. It can come from another religion, another culture, and you can assemble it. And the Sermon on the Mount is kind of rooted in that tradition. It's wisdom, and you can kind of take from it, and you can also there's a thing that's in the wisdom tradition, and it comes from the book of Proverbs. It says, let's see, like the limbs of the lame is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. So the idea that so something may be true no matter where it comes from, but something may be true and in the wrong context be terribly wrong. So if you think about it, you look at these different teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. The question is not only is it true, but when is it true? You know, under what circumstances is it true? In what situations is it true? Because if you don't if you apply it to the wrong situation, then the language of Proverbs is full. Wise and fool. There's not many choices in Proverbs. You're one or the other. And if you apply a proverb or a teaching in the wrong context, so that leads to foolishness. So you might think about that as you're looking at the different teachings. Is under what context was this written for? What context is it? So,
Chris?
Yeah.
Can I add a Jewish interpretation that I learned at the synagogue?
Sure. Yeah.
Anything that separates you from God is a sin.
Yeah.
And your verse just made me think of that.
Yeah, and I think the corresponding thing is what might separate you from your neighbor too. That what estranges you, what leads to estrangement and separation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any questions from last week before we plow into the next thing? All right. Here is our next reading. Who wants to read it? Okay, Jackie, thanks.
Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one.
How many of y'all watched the inauguration? You do that?
Yeah.
What did Joe Biden do?
Or on a Bible.
He took an oath. He took an oath on the Bible. How many of y'all have ever testified in court or been in court when somebody was testifying? That's right. What do they do? What do they make you do before you testify?
Swear on a Bible.
And then,
they also say, do you swear or solemnly affirm in some cases? Yeah,
that is true that they do. You can modify it, and you can modify what document. Some people swear, like I think Amy Broyles, when she was county commissioner, swore in on the Constitution, and I'm pretty sure Seema used a Hindu text once. So but it's just to tell you that the swearing oaths, giving oaths is really common. I mean, it ostensibly, where, if this is the spiritual tradition of Western, lack of a better word, Western civilization, or people say the United States is a Christian country. How come we're swearing oaths all the time? Because it's really quite common. Anybody else think of a time where people are asked to swear oaths? The Boy Scouts. So you're Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. They have the Boy Scout oath and the Girl Scout oath. So, needless to say,
joining the military.
That's right. That's right.
And getting married.
Getting married. That's right. Yeah. The wedding vows and things like that. Yeah, that's good. So some of the Anabaptist traditions take this very seriously. The Quakers, the Church of the Brethren, the Mennonites, and it often gets, I think they're like Rocky mentioned, you could say solemnly affirmed. There's been some leeway given over the years, but it used to be, you could get in a lot of trouble for not taking an oath in certain circumstances. And so you would literally be punished for not not swearing an oath. And there are Quakers that went to jail for it in England. So this is something that was taken very seriously by certain traditions, and people were willing to go to jail rather than swear an oath. They would say yes or no. Let your yea be your yea and your nay be your nay. And so that was I'm most familiar with the Quakers because that's where I went to school. The other thing about Quakers is because they had that tradition, they were known for being very honest in business. You didn't have to, get them to swear they wouldn't cheat you, or that sense that your yay was your yay and your nay was your nay meant they were trustworthy people in business. And that's why a lot, and it's a fraudulent thing. A lot of businesses will name themselves Quaker that aren't Quaker, like Quaker Oats isn't really, it wasn't started by Quakers, but it's they're taking it. It's funny because Quakers are known for honesty. People dishonestly appropriate their name. So that's an interesting thing. The Moravians also. So there you go. Any thoughts on that? It's, we have elected officials. They've all sworn oaths of office. I've gone to the swearing in ceremonies. So that's a regular part of people's lives. I guess if you're serving, if you serve in for the government, they're regularly asked to take oaths. So there you go. You will be getting into trouble if you obey Jesus these days. Okay.
So where did the tradition of taking these oaths come from, given the strong Christian roots of the majority in the U.S.?
My guess is essentially what you have is you have the religion of Jesus, and then you have the religion of Jesus once the Roman Empire turns it into an official religion. And a lot of what changes is what you need to have an empire. So you can't have an empire and be pacifists. so you're gonna do some theology around that to avoid that problem. And oath taking and things like that are built into that idea. How do you build a trustworthy team that can soldiers and government officials? So I think that's that. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. You can read the Sermon on the Mount and say, what has it got to do with the way Christianity is practiced in this land? As Frederick Douglass pointed out, it's a fair question. So, all right. So the next reading, I think it's interesting to. There was an Anglican bishop who once said the greatest Christian of the 20th century was a Hindu, and he was talking about Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, in his practice of the Sermon on the Mount. And Gandhi said that if that was all he had to agree to, he could call himself a Christian. But since there was a whole lot else that went with the word, he couldn't. And but he even took the parts that would distress most of us. He that lust in your heart thing. He tried to meditate so he had essentially no passion in that department. So he took even some of the more what we might say the least healthy parts of it quite seriously too. And this is one that he took quite seriously. Who wants to read it? Okay, Earl.
You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you.
What's that from?
That is, it's still the Sermon on the Mount. It's the next verse here,
Okay.
38, 38 verses 38 through 42. So an eye for an eye for a tooth for tooth is actually in the Hebrew scriptures. I think Deuteronomy, but I don't have that. And it was meant to be a principle of limitation. I no more than an eye for an eye, no more than a tooth for a tooth, essentially not unlimited retribution for an injury, some principle limitation. There is not a lot of archaeological evidence that people were plucking out eyes or teeth. So the rabbinic tradition is that there's compensation, essentially financial compensation along those lines, that there should be based on, the injury and the reparation should be aligned. And if you think about it, at the end of World War I, where the desire for Germany to do reparations for World War I got quite punitive, and most people think that punitive approach to reparations was why World War II happened.
A factor.
Yeah, it was certainly a factor. There's multiple factors that went into it, but but it just shows you there is sometimes in the human to have a wrong done and want kind of an unlimited response to it. So that's a principle of limitation. But Gandhi said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth would leave the whole world blind and toothless. The idea to move in a direction of forgiveness was very Gandhian as well as very Jesus oriented. Let's see. I'm trying to remember. So the usual things that would be calculated in a rabbinic tradition would be pain, injury, cost, loss of income. So there was, it's kind of typical of, the way a modern lawsuit would be handled. So if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. The right, that was kind of like a formal insult. More than like trying to knock you to the ground kind of punch. It was more of a formal insult, and turn the other cheek would be kind of essentially a de-escalating an insult of sorts. It is and so it's essentially respond to insults in a nonviolent way. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. According to rabbinic law, you couldn't ask for somebody's coat because somebody's survival depends on their coat. So this is kind of a maybe making someone embarrassed. These are compulsory things. So this is like something a Roman soldier might demand your shirt or demand your cloak. And so this is essentially, how do you respond to oppression when you're a powerless, person? And so the thought of this is a way to assert agency. Literally, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go with them 2 miles. That was actually something Roman soldiers could compel you to do. They could give you, hey, carry my backpack, and compel you. But they were limited in how much they could do it. And this suggests that, you would do more than they asked of you. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from one who wants to borrow from you. You do not hear Knoxville city government saying do that when you're downtown. I mean, it is countercultural. People discourage it, and I point out these things just to show this is countercultural. It was countercultural then, and it's countercultural now. I had a friend that said he always gave whenever somebody asked him. He said it was my libertarian taxes. So that was his idea about how wealth should be distributed. So, yep, Mary.
I think I heard you say that the situation of if someone wants your coat, that's a really good discussion. I really love the rabbinic references to it. Really fleshes some things out. I think I heard you say that it's what to do if you're not powerful, if you don't have power.
Yeah, these are compulsory things. The slap on the cheek is an insult that anybody of any power level might do to you. So turning the other cheek, that's de-escalating. But the demanding of the cloak and the asking somebody to walk 2 miles, or you would be, it's a power and powerlessness situation. So there's a. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, that I would imagine. In most forms of Christianity, some that are not truly Christian from my perspective, that's probably one of the least followed, hardest to follow.
Yeah.
I think, and in the world that we're in today, is when someone's pushing you to take, whether it's what one considers a right or something like eminent domain, or bullies in any way, shape, or form across stages. It's like where the references that counter that have to be somewhere there in the written Christian word. Yeah,
well, to be honest, there are lots of traditions that well, let's just say most of the tradition just ignores it, and to be honest, there was a Christian leader, I can't remember who it was, but it was a preacher who said, he said, we need Donald Trump. He's not one of those turn the other cheek guys. He's like, he's a minister, he's a, so, so the people are ministers who are, opposed to the teachings of Jesus, or, maybe shouldn't surprise us, but these are incredibly countercultural things. The Quakers, the Mennonites, Gandhi. Gandhi was quite. Gandhi would say, though, he would say that it's better to be that nonviolence was the courageous choice, and if you were nonviolent out of cowardice, it would be better if you fought. It was better to be courageous than it was to be nonviolent. And so he saw he saw in this pattern of nonviolent resistance the opportunities for liberation. And the civil rights movement, literally, the people, the integrated groups would sit at the table and they would get hit, and they would not hit back. But neither were they walking mats. There was demonstrating. They were putting the shame on the assaulter. The person who hit was the person who looked ugly on camera, and it had an effect on the nation. So these are some of the ways it's been heard. I'm not saying they're the only ways it can be heard. Rocky, you had a question?
Yeah, kind of a statement. Two things come to mind. The first thing I was thinking of was that perhaps this is done within a religious community where you all basically have the same beliefs, so that if a Christian slapped you, then you might turn your cheek. But the other thing, another thing is, I've seen it presented in documentaries where a person was very passive and it had a very powerful effect. And this being Black History Month, that was Dr. King's philosophy. Yeah. You're going to be passive while they're beating you and shooting you. And
I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and the love your enemies, because I think these are connected teachings. And somebody Don asked about what I meant by compulsory. Essentially, what a Roman soldier might tell you. Walk a mile with me. Give me your coat. So that's it's that. It's not necessarily a conversation between your neighbor and your equals. Just to give you an idea how cultural, to speak with Rocky's cultural context, in certain Native American cultures, they have the idea of the potlatch, where you essentially give away all your worldly possessions. you know. And I remember learning about that and thinking, wow, that's a really, I mean, you talk about natives being more, biblical than people who read the Bible, give away all your possessions and let go of it. And then when you think about what it's like to be in a tribe, well, all that stuff's close by. If you need it, you can borrow it. So it's really kind of it's not so much like this ego thing. I'm letting go of my possessions. It's more like I'm surrendering trust to my tribe and surrendering trust to my group. I'm part and parcel of this group. I'm not this separate, person hoarding things. And I do think there's some of that's in here too. So that's the question you're talking about, Rocky, is what is the context? He is talking about ways that he's talking to the early followers, and this is what he recommends as the ethic. But they are in Rome, and they are not. It's an oppressive situation, and we're going to talk some more about some kind of hidden counter-revolutionary stuff in the Sermon on the Mount too. So it's not about being a walking mat per se. Apostle Paul softens it, I guess Apostle Paul makes some things harder. It's like, and he makes things rough, but here he softens it. It says, "Insomuch as you are able, live peaceably with with all other people." That's a rough translation, but the "insomuch as you are able" is an enormous qualifier to put in there. So just know. In Vedanta Hinduism, there's a Vedanta Hindu commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. They say non-resistance is the highest virtue, but not everyone is expected to live up to its highest meaning. And one understanding of the Sermon on the Mount is it really is the ethic of the most dedicated disciple. That there's a householder ethic and there's a discipleship ethic, and this is for the disciples. And so that in the Hindu tradition, this is not everyone is expected, and your intentions are mattered. And this is where Gandhi comes in. If you're doing it out of cowardice, then that may not be the right thing for you to do. It's better to be brave. It's better to be than it is to be a coward. So it's also the other thing that said Gandhi felt like it was a position of strength. And if you felt like you were doing it from a position of weakness, then that wasn't nonviolence. If you were capitulating because you were weak, that wasn't what he was talking about. So, and then there's another Hindu legend about a snake, and you may have heard it. The snake is on the side of the road, and it has a reputation for being pretty mean and biting people as they go by. And then one day a guru comes by, and the snake wants to bite the guru, and the guru says, be calm. And the guru teaches the snake meditation, and it teaches the snake to be calm and teaches the snake to be quiet. And so the snake becomes a very peaceful snake. And he says, now I won't bite people anymore. I won't harm anybody anymore. I'll be a peaceful snake here on the side of the road. So a little bit later, somebody comes along and sees the snake, and they're scared of the snake because they've been bitten by the snake before. So they just beat the snake all up, and the snake's all bruised and battered. And the guru comes by, and he says, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, and I was trying to be peaceful. I was trying to be a peacemaker, and I got beat up." And the guru said, "Well, I never told you couldn't hiss." So there is something to that, something to the having a little edge there. So, and that leads us nicely to the other one. So yeah, if you're not entirely comfortable with that one, that means you understood it. So it's okay. Sorry, I lost my. See. Okay, let me find my. Okay, now is love your enemies. And there's some overlap here. Okay, who wants to read that one?
Let me see. You have heard that I have said, love your neighbor. Oh, am I on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, do you want me to read it with my poor voice?
Well, if you can give it a try.
All righty. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, the evil and the good. So you can say it quicker.
And the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are you not the tax collectors doing that? Oh, are not the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing?
More than others. Yeah.
Let me see. And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Okay. This one they're absolutely sure Jesus said, because it's right, it's one of the essentially the first time someone said love your enemies. There are some corresponding teachings in the Torah, but they don't say you have to love your enemy. In Leviticus it says you shall not hate in your heart anyone of your kin, or reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but shall love your neighbor as yourself. So there's that, don't hold ill will and grievances, but it doesn't say you have to love them. And when you encounter, this is Exodus, when you encounter the lost ox or donkey of your enemy, you shall bring it back to them. When you see your enemy's donkey lying helpless under a burden, you shall refrain from leaving him alone. You must help him to release it. So there's a sense of empathy and compassion for your adversary or your enemy, but there's no direct commandment to love. There is also, you said you have heard it, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. The Jewish tradition has nothing about hating your neighbor in it. And the most that was a Essene tradition that did have some kind of things about hating the enemies of God in it, but it was not mainstream Judaism. So that's sometimes becomes interpreted as anti-Semitic assumption that was in Jewish tradition, and it is not.
Chris?
Yeah.
There's a Native American saying about this. I don't know how familiar people are with it. It says something to the effect of, when you hate someone, it is like drinking poison and expecting them to die.
Yeah, I don't
know how familiar people are.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of a proverb. I'm not sure where I've heard it in more than one place, so I'm not sure where the origin is. And but I do think that's there's a book out by Arthur Brooks called "Love Your Enemies," and he's interesting because he's I would call him a mainstream conservative commentator, but he was raised by liberal parents, and he's very interested in how do you have dialogue across political differences. Where we're continually being told to have contempt for each other, and so he says that really at the heart of it is this idea of contempt, to be taught that you have contempt for those who are different from you, contempt for people who disagree with you, contempt for and that kind of puts them in the same department as trash, or a disease, or and so how do you move back? He's not. Jesus didn't say don't have any enemies. Jesus didn't say be everybody's friend. To have views and to have principles, you'll have enemies. But how do you? So it's love your enemies. So and Arthur Brooks really goes in. He does research and about how holding grudges and holding contempt for people is terrible for our health, because holding people in contempt is a stressful thing for you to do to your body, and your body holds in those stress the hormones that are produced for stress. It's fight or flight, so you're essentially producing the hormones that are meant for short term, get you out of a dangerous situation, but you're doing it all the time. If you're listening to talk radio or you're listening into that contempt language on a daily basis, then essentially you're wearing out your whole body with that and that leads, heart attacks, strokes, all sorts of high blood pressure, all sorts of things are created by that. So I find it
easier.
Yeah.
I find it easier to just understand that the evil that they do just comes from sickness. And you can't hate a sick person. And that helps me deal with wrongs that have been committed,
Mm-hmm.
Trump was a good example of trying not to hate someone. He's just a sick animal. It's all right to say that on here.
Well, we don't endorse candidates but we do recognize anger management issues when we see them, and certainly the former president was a great example of someone with anger management issues. So no, I think that's a huge thing, and I do think people with anger management and that kind of contempt are hurting themselves. If you look at some of these talk radio show hosts that have multiple marriages, it's not helping them get along with their intimate partners. This kind of I've got the right position and I'm angry. If you get where if you can demonize anybody, if you can demonize someone, you can demonize anyone, and it could even be your closest partner. It just becomes an orientation that you can take into places, and that's why if you Jake Morrill does military chaplaincy, and I have some other friends that do military chaplaincy, and most of their chaplaincy is around marital issues. You'd think it'd be the battlefield, but it's coming home from the battlefield to the home, taking the enemy, the focus on a fight against an enemy into a home, in the ways that plays out so badly. Looks like somebody found the book. It's a really good book. He's also does some podcasts. He is conservative, and I don't agree with all his political positions, but I totally agree with his attitude toward how to be in dialogue with each other. I disagree with him on the minimum wage in a big way, and I still think there's insights. I think it's a very insightful book. So, and probably every one of us has somebody in our family, that we end up doing a cross dial. There's some sort of gap between where we are and where they are, and this is a good book. It can help your family out. So one of the things he talks about is we're in the middle of the outrage industrial complex, and hatred and contempt is an addiction, and that's what that research in Facebook said. People will click on things that make them angry. They will click on, and so the whole algorithms of the internet are toward anger and toward polarization. And so the thing we need to know for our own spiritual life is, am I getting addicted to this? Am I getting addicted to the adrenaline rush of anger, the adrenaline rush? There certainly are legitimate things to be angry angry about, but it's kind of it's about monitoring yourself and figuring out, am I in the throes of an addiction, or am I controlling my anger? Is my anger controlling me? So would be other ways to say. So what does it mean to love your enemy? Thomas Aquinas said, to love is to wish the good for another. So you don't necessarily have to like them, as long as you're wishing the good for the other, you kind of have the well-being of the other in mind, emoting some goodwill. I think Martin Luther King often talked about the love that was bigger than like, that there were people that you might not be able to like, that you can still wish good on. I think of that phrase Lincoln used, malice toward none and charity for all, kind of this sense of walking through the world, and you can be disagree without having malice, and having a charitable, that's what Rocky was saying, charitable, like looking at somebody's motivation and coming up with a charitable way to understand them. There's a great quote by Barbara Brown Taylor, who's an Episcopal priest. And I mention this because sometimes in evangelical cultures, the other religions are the enemy. I mean, we have the Muslim ban, we have we're going to ban Muslims from this country. We're going to, so you get that. And Barbara Brown Taylor said in the middle of that, he says, if I have to choose between loving my neighbor and loving my own religion, I will love my neighbor because my religion doesn't command me to love my religion. It commands me to love my neighbor. So there's that sense of love your neighbor includes people of different faiths. This is where I'm reading a book about called The Soul of Doubt, and it talks about a lot of what's led to skepticism and atheism and agnosticism in the early days wasn't science, but was Christian ethics meets Christian theology. And so if you're being taught to love your enemy, but taught that God doesn't, it's God's going to damn people to hell forever. And, God wants you. And this is the time when people were being killed and burned at the stake for their religious beliefs. So essentially there was an uproar against the immorality done in God's name, that led people to say that it was better to be a nonviolent agnostic or a nonviolent atheist than a violent believer. That the way we live is more important. Orthopraxy is better than orthodoxy. Orthopraxy is better than orthodoxy. So there you go. I do think I hear that over and over again. So in the early Reformation. So Chris, you had a question?
That reminded me of situations in the not too distant past where people ranted and raved against secular humanism.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is sort of the flip of that. And these were people who call themselves Christians, but saw good works as being meaningless unless they were within a particular church framework.
Yeah, and I think that's the heart of the radical Reformation. The radical Reformation is more interested in orthopraxy than orthodoxy. There's room for freedom to think and freedom to question. And the history of religion is like Martin Luther is a great champion for religious toleration until he's in power, and then he's the worst. So I mean, there's mixed messages in the tradition. If you read early Martin Luther, you think, what a great guy, and then later he's an anti-Semite, and he's for the Lord's putting down the riffraff, and there's just quite a move there. So I guess that is to say that it's an ethical revolt. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, you can read in the Sermon on the Mount and say, what's going on at Liberty University? What's going on unquestioning alliance to try to uproot critical race theory and what's going on. People are the teachings of love your enemy, and you're going to kick out your kid because they have a different sexual orientation or gender identity. There's just, and I've actually counseled a evangelical Christian conservative home. I'll try to tell the story short, but they came to me after their now adult son died, and he died of natural causes, but they had been estranged from him because of his sexual orientation, because of their religion. They thought, he was immoral, and they profoundly regretted it. If you can imagine what it took, evangelical Christian and in Spartanburg, if you're evangelical conservative, you're more than you are in Knoxville. It's nothing but really intense. And they came to find a Unitarian minister to have the service in the Unitarian church, so we could be honest about who he was and talk about who he was. But it was, so people are, horribly served by their own traditions. So there's a lot, anytime people are demonizing or ostracizing people in the name of religion, what has that got to do with this? What's it got to do with the Sermon on the Mount? There's some hidden kind of interesting things in there too. Kind of a naturalism. The sun rises on the just and the unjust. The sun rises on the evil and the good, and the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. That's the world, and that's actually an image from the Egyptian solar religion. It was a bigger idea of God. Was they noticed that the sun doesn't stop at the state line. The sun. If you have this religion that says our nation is good and the other nation is bad, well, then why doesn't the sun stop when it gets to your border? The sun shines on every land. So there's this sense of universal benevolence at the heart of benevolence and, the hard stuff. Both of it happens to both of us. Let's see. There was a pledge that civil rights activists took in Birmingham, Alabama, which I think this pulls together the turn your other cheek and love your enemies together. And they were all asked to take a pledge. They didn't say oath, so I guess they're okay. Said, remember, the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. So it's nonviolent, but it's seeking justice and reconciliation, not victory. Walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love. Pray daily to be used by God that all might be free. Sacrifice personal wishes that all might be free. Observe with friend and foes the ordinary rules of courtesy, and refrain from violence of fist, tongue, and heart. So this was essentially a bringing together of the turn the other cheek and the love your enemies to radical and dangerous and risky social change as part of the civil rights movement. So, all right. Seems like there was some, yeah. And then be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Well, we might not talk about anything else. That can't be. There's no hard way to interpret that. There's no, So, I use that. There are a couple of ways people try to soften it. The one way to interpret that is be whole as your heavenly Father is whole. So a call to wholeness rather than perfection. But I honestly think this whole sermon is about standards that are higher than you're going to meet. It's never going to be, I nailed it. I nailed that. I got it. I think it's all about living up to certain ideals and standards that you're not. So be ye perfect. That's one. That's definitely one. Mary?
This kind of discussion almost always reminds me of a quote I hear attributed to Woody Allen.
Yeah.
Saying, if there is a God, he's an underachiever.
Yeah. That's a good one. Well, I'll meet your quote with a Stephen Colbert quote. He said he was criticizing sensitive New Age dads, and he said you shouldn't teach your God that teach your kids that your God's soft like that. God is omnipotent. He said hard to please. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I screwed that whole joke up. I'll have to go back. He said you shouldn't be a soft dad. You should be a hard dad that's impossible to please. Otherwise, how will kids understand the concept of God? So that's never being able to live up, never being able to do that. So I do think there is some. I mean, I do think the negative is you can't live up to it. That could make you have an inferior complex your whole life. But the other part of it is this is not literalism. You cannot make this literalism. You can't make it legalism. You can't codify it into law. And all the people who are trying to do that are off base. They're missing the point. So that's the positive side of it. Any other thoughts about that before we move on to the next? Okay, I gotta pull up the next. Okay, this one. Well, actually, this one's a little longer. I'm going to put two things together because they both have themes in them that are, and people can take. Maybe somebody can read the first half, somebody else can read the second half. Okay. Maybe it's going to make me do. Okay, I'm gonna do half because actually it's too much to put into a chat. So, okay.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Giving to the needy. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you.
This is related to the next one. So, which somebody want to read the next one? It's about prayer.
I'll do that.
Okay.
And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. And then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him.
Apologies to any pagans. I don't get to choose the text. So imagine if somebody were to, the governor of Tennessee was to go, and when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the football stadiums.
I like that.
Yeah. It just shows you how this is countercultural stuff. There's so much emphasis on public prayer and public religiosity, and there's a paradox here because at the beginning he says, you're the light of the world, let your light shine, let people see you. And I just think that you just can't get away from the paradox, but it's also be mindful that am I doing this to be seen? Am I doing it for ego reasons? Am I doing it for self-gratification? Am I doing it for a theme you hear over and over again is being good is better than looking good, you know. And so the almost everything he says about the Pharisees you could translate as poser. Do not be a poser. Do not pose. Do not turn your religion into a pose.
Wasn't one of your op-eds in the past about that?
Yeah. Not Tennessee gives me lots of chances to talk.
Yes, it does.
No, and there's a lot of emphasis on public religiosity, and it has all the dangers that are in here. You know, it's about being seen. You know, the prayer breakfast. You know, all the politicians line up to be at the prayer breakfast. You know, that's how you know they're gonna steal some money from you. They're gonna be at the prayer breakfast and write some little sneaky loophole in the law they're gonna cash in on. So my friend Bill Huckabee used to say when he went into business, if somebody introduced themselves as a Christian businessman, when he was young, he thought, "Oh, how nice," and then he grabbed his wallet before it got stolen. So the people using kind of public religiosity. I always let's see. So yeah, there's a bit of a paradox there. There's a contrast between kind of outward recognition and inward spiritual experience. You know, what is the reward, you know? And if you think of God as a personal God, a personal being that's like, okay, here's your bag of money because you did the right thing, or here's your sticker. That's one way to think about it. But it's another thing to think about that there's something organic, you know, that there are intrinsic spiritual rewards to prayer or generosity or charity that is internalized, and biologists will tell you that, you know, when you do charitable things, there's a physiological benefit to the human system that we're made to share and to give. How did public demonstration of religion evolve to be so visual? Dawn asks. I think it's television. So I think that's a huge part of it. So you think about Donald Trump, you know, getting the troops to separate the protesters so he can go pose in front of the church with the Bible. But you know, every politician does it. I mean, it seems to be built into American religion. Reinhold Niebuhr once said, "No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or our foe as from our own." You know, that somebody else may see a little bit more self-motivation in what we're doing. While we're like doing a good thing, somebody else may see our action as, you know, self-motivated. So I think this teaching is just live the examine life, you know, examine your intentions, examine your motivations. You know, it's not what you do, it's your motivations behind it that are as important. And Matthew Fox said spirituality is about moving from being egocentric to being ecocentric, and he means that in the broadest possible way: big picture, small picture to big picture. And I think that's the other thing here is there's definitely that, you know, the ways that certain religiosity can just be reinforced egocentric behavior. So he's warning you against that. Now there's a Jewish tradition, Maimonides has a charitable ladder, which it's actually unpacks some of the same issues about charity and giving, but looks at it in a different way. And says there's 8 ways to give, and some are better than others. So the least good, all of them are good. That's what Maimonides would say. Anytime you give, it's a good thing. But the least good, the lowest one would be if you give begrudgingly and make the recipient embarrassed. You know, you insist on gratitude, insist on some sort of display of thanks or something like that. So it's still good because you gave, but it's also not that good. The next thing that's the next lowest is to give cheerfully but give too little. like you're not begrudgingly giving it, but you're not really giving enough to help. That's still good. It's better than nothing. That's kind of what I like this. Like, it's like, well, it's better than nothing. Everything's better than nothing. It's better to be charitable, even if your intentions aren't good, but they're trying to move you in the right direction. So the next one is to give cheerfully and adequately, but only after you're asked. Mm-hmm. So, you give cheerfully, but you wait till you're asked. And then the next level is you give before being asked. And then the next level is you give when you do not know who the individual is benefiting. So you give somebody, but you don't know who it is. You don't know who's receiving it. It's just general goodwill that you're giving. And the next higher level is giving when you know who the individual is who's benefiting, but the recipient doesn't know your identity. So you're hidden. So you're not doing it for ego reasons. You're doing it to help somebody. The next highest level is giving when neither the donor nor the recipient are aware of the other's identity. And then the highest is giving money, a loan, your time, or whatever else it takes to enable an individual to be self-reliant, so that it is general. Now, it might be you give a contract to somebody that starting out a new business, or you just see. You think about Jenny Arthur and her T-shirt group and the kind of the ethical enterprise, which is, it's not about, giving somebody charity. It's about giving people jobs, but they're the kind of people other people might not hire, and so it is actually one of the sociological economic truths that if you can empower people, more good will come to them than if more people can do more for themselves than you can ever do for them. So if you can help, you can help empower people, then you help everyone. So that's kind of at the heart of that. So, and it's the same thing. It's like ego check, how much of my ego, is this? And, as I often say in the conservatives believe in very low federal spending, which is why you'll never see a federal highway named after one, or a federal building named after one, or a park, So anyhow, you see, that's just part of the dynamic. People will do things to get their name on things, to get recognition. Okay. I want to do an interesting exercise here. So, Bill Murrah taught me this exercise, because the next thing we're at is the Lord's Prayer, or Our Father. If you grew up Catholic, those are two different framings of it. And Bill Murrah paired these, and I don't know, I think he got the idea from somebody else. He paired these two readings. One's from Native American tradition, and one is from is the Lord's Prayer. So I invite you to hold your hands like you don't have to hold them up this high, because that's just so you can see them, but you hold your palms toward the earth. And then this comes from Native American tradition. The earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of earth. If we spit upon the ground, we spit upon ourselves. This we know. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. This we know. All things are connected, like blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And now if you put your palms up, and if you know it, you can say it with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory. Amen. So, how did that feel?
Awful.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I was comfortable with the first one.
Yeah, there we go. So comfortable with the first one. We're going to talk about that. That we could talk all night about the first two words of the prayer, Our Father. That alone is
Yeah.
So. Any other thoughts?
It seems like we might have said, our Creator who dwells among us, instead of up in heaven.
Yeah. That's right. That's why you're a Unitarian.
Now
The Native American one dealt with being on the planet and being on Earth, being part of that, and the Lord's Prayer deals with up there.
Yeah.
But it taps into some old traditions that in spirituality, that the Father image of divinity has been associated with the sky, even in Native tradition, Grandfather Moon and things like that. So there are, and then the Earth is a mother. Not always, and not legalistically, but there's been some sense of my sister wanted to write a book about Jesus's sister that got left out of the story, and hers was, how do we treat the earth and how do we take care of the earth? And Jesus got all the publicity and all the attention, and she was ignored. And I think it's a great idea for a novel, but that's also kind of at the heart of this thing. What does patriarchy leave out? What does patriarchy leave out? And I think that is an effort to sort of say, father imagery leaves a lot out. It leaves half of the picture out. So this is the actual a good translation of the prayer, and it's a little bit different from the one I did, because the one I did was more familiar. Who wants to read this one? So remember, this is the prayer you're not supposed to say in public. I mean, we most of us know it because we said it in public in some place. This is actually the prayer you're supposed to say in your private closet, or your private room. So, we
sang it at the First Presbyterian Church when I was there.
That's right.
Every Sunday.
So that's right. Yeah, it's associated with public prayer, even though it was said to be for private things. I'll read this one because since we already said it together, that we can look at the ways it's different. This is how you should pray: Our Father in heaven. So you're alone in your closet. You're by yourself, but you're not saying "My Father." You are not God's only child, as it were. That you are connected with brothers and sisters and siblings and members of the family. So the affirmation has that sense of connection, not only to the transcendent, but to other people. We're all members, the sense that we're all members of one family. This imagery of God as Father can be very problematic, but sometimes some people who have the same experience have different ways of interpreting it. And when I was in seminary, I was in a classroom discussion, and two women were talking, and one woman said, I can never use the language God as Father because I had a horribly abusive father. And it was just a horrible, scary, fearful experience. And that's why I can never use that word to describe God. And another woman said, I also had a horrible and abusive father. And that's why I like to use the word. The word may be bad because it triggers feelings of abuse and neglect. And for the other person, it separates. It's a word. I can use this word here that I would never use at home. It's easier for me to use that word for transcendent, ultimate reality than it would be for my own, biological dad. So anything that uses the language Our Father, I actually think this is a thing about the Bible in general, is we bring our own stories to it. And so almost all the characters in the parables, how we feel about what they do, it says more about our lives and what we do, you know. So like in the prodigal son, how you feel about the older brother and the younger brother may be influenced by whether you were an older sibling or a younger. So, I mean, there's a lot that we bring to it. And I think our Father in heaven is one we bring a lot of stories to. And sometimes there's pain there that needs to be unpacked before you could even go to the next line or even consider the next line. So
I'm disappointed in the Bible's raising the man above the woman.
Yeah.
I just don't believe God ever intended that.
There are biblical passages that you know, in the wisdom tradition, there's some feminine images for the divine in the book Proverbs and in the Wisdom of Solomon, and in the parables, you know, the kingdom of God is like a woman who loses a coin and sweeps under everything. So, well, who's the woman? You know, there's a couple of parables where God is the woman, and so there is some imagery there, but it is not the dominant theme. So I'm both one, not trying to say you're not right, because you are, but there are often hidden things that are present. So the personification of God's wisdom is Sophia, who's a woman, and it's talked about in feminine terms. So there are some feminine images for the divine in the Bible, but they are definitely not the dominant thing. But you can gem mine. In the wisdom tradition, you would choose those parts. You would say, this is true. You know, this, you know, it may not be the dominant part of the thing, but I'm gonna carve it out as true. Any other thoughts about father? Caesar was known as the father of the fatherland, and so to suggest that there's another father, you know, a greater father, a father who is of ultimate authority other than Caesar, has some radical implications. So, any other thoughts about our fathers?
How was that judged by that group? The ones who evaluated what was said in the Bible.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think father language. I'll look it up while we're doing that, because I have that handy here. But father language is something that's Jesus uses it more. There's a number of different choices, and he's certainly not the first one to do it, but he does it a lot. So. I'll look that up while we're going. The next part is hallowed be thy name. So honestly, you know, it's interesting that word hallowed has the same origins as Halloween. So I don't know if you thought about that. So it means to make something holy. And so Halloween, the original meaning is to a holy evening. So for 2,000 years, Jews weren't allowed to pronounce the word God or Yahweh. It's spelled YHWH. I mean, that's a translation, but it's essentially four Hebrew words, four Hebrew letters. And the thing is, that's why the early Jewish tradition would use terms like Adonai and Elohim and the other words other than Yahweh. So the idea that to even speak the word was to somehow desecrate it, that somehow God is above words and above language. When God appears in the burning bush, and Moses asks, "Who are you?" He says, "I am who I am," you know, which is not exactly a name. It's more like a job description. I am who I am. I think that we got the radio on again somewhere. So, somebody got the radio on?
I was wondering, I once learned that to put a name on God was to limit him.
Yeah. Yeah, Meister Eckhart said nothing is so much like God as silence. That every word falls short. Or Abraham Heschel said every statement about God is an understatement. So hallowed be thy name. Every statement we can make is an understatement. Would be a good, if we were to do a modern translation, Holy One. Every statement of you is an understatement. That might be a good hallowed be thy name. And Hindu thought is ultimate reality, God, Brahman, is higher than your highest thought, and so hallowed be thy name is about transcendence. Politicians use the word. There's that teaching in the Bible: do not take the Lord's name in vain. So that's also hallowed be thy name. Don't use it in vain. I always say in Tennessee, the sure way to win office is one, honor God and then bear false witness against your neighbor. It's like, lie like a dog, after you've said something good about God, and you might be governor. So so that's they're saying, don't do that. So that would be at the heart of that. Don't take your Lord's name in vain. And there was a bishop in the 50s. I can't remember who it was. It'll come to me in a second. But he used to say there need to be a 20-year moratorium on the word God, because it had ceased to be a meaningful term. It had become a social construction, as it were. Too many people meant too many different things by it, and it had departed from what it was meant to mean. So there you go. If a bishop can say it, maybe there's something to it. So hallowed be thy name. Every statement is an understatement. So the next line is...
There's a Gullah story. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going on the next thing.
I was going to refer back to the Gullah that I told you about.
Yeah.
There's a story that a lady, he's interviewing a lady in the civil process there, trying to help her. And what's your daughter's name? And says Hallowed. And it says, where did you get that? And it said, in the Bible, hallowed be thy name.
Yeah.
And so she named her daughter Hallowed. That's one of those Gullah stories.
Yeah. All right. So the next line is your kingdom come. So what is God's kingdom? I mean, that's actually a good question. And there's actually more than one answer to it in the Bible, let alone outside of the Bible. So, but that's at the heart of the prayer, your kingdom come. So, it seems like we should know what it is. And one tradition is, one early understanding of the kingdom was it would be a political kingdom with a new king, literally a new king, a new regime, on earth. And it was a very political thing. And, that's one of the arguments why Jesus wasn't the Messiah, because there was no new physical kingdom. There was no new, king that took over. So that was one idea of what it meant at the time. Let's see. Now, here's one of the more mysterious verses around the kingdom, which is Luke 17:21. He's asked about the kingdom of God. He says, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there, but behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Kingdom of God is within you. Now, the challenge is that word within can also be translated as among you. And so if you've ever heard a sermon about the kingdom of God is within you and among you, it's because they were trying to get the best of both of those, translations. And you literally, if you like scroll on a computer program and get to that word, you're just given that choice. You have to make that choice. And the early King James chose within, and the Gnostic Gospels have some similar. There's some God within you, kingdom of God's within you language in some of them. And here's one from Gospel of Thomas, which is not within you, but it's similar. He said, his disciples said to him, on what day will the kingdom come? And Jesus said, it will not come while people watch for it. They will not say, look, here it is, or look, there it is. For the kingdom of the Father is spread out over the earth, and men do not see it. So it's already here. It's already all around you. You just don't see it. Or maybe you do. I'm discounting. The members of this class no doubt do. So, but he's suggesting that others might not see it. So one is
maybe if.
Yeah, Rocky, what did you say?
I'm sorry. Maybe, if we all lived by these principles, we would bring heaven. It would be.
So that actually kind of fits in with another tradition. There's a phrase, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all other things will be added unto you. So it's that sense of seek first what connects us all, i.e. the brotherhood, sisterhood, unity of the human family. Seek first that common good, and all other things will be added unto you. So your kingdom come is about the well-being of all God's creation, all God's creatures. And so that's one tradition. And the social gospel movement of the 20th century was very big into that. And the word beloved community comes from that. The beloved community was another word for the kingdom of God in Protestant tradition. The beloved community, where we treat people the way that they should be treated. It's about this sense of the ideal community, the ideal society. And in Jewish tradition, the kingdom is about the messianic age, and that's when the lion and the lamb will lie down together, and the wolf with the kid. So there's got to be a whole level of peace. That's why in the Jewish tradition they will often say that's how we know the Messiah hasn't come. You don't see lions and lambs lying down together. That's look out your window. It's not happened yet. So. But there's also a political edge to this. It's kind of like when in the African American tradition in the South, where you would sing something about how good heaven was, you were also critiquing earth. I've got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes. You're saying something about earth. It's a social critique that's in a vision of heaven. So to be in a kingdom, to be in the Roman Empire and say, thy kingdom come, is a critique of the present social order, to say we are not in the perfect world yet. We are under, there's a whole list of criticisms that could go with that. So any other thoughts about that? All right. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our class, but I think we can probably get to the prayer.
Mary had her hand up.
Okay, what?
Mary had her hand up.
I just had this awful image in my mind that I'd really like to share with everybody, because it's awful. Is the idea of the kingdom, the new kingdom coming, and I didn't know that about beloved community coming from that. So thank you.
Yeah.
But the image I had that somebody needs to help us get away from this before we leave, but I'm going to say it, is climate change leading to the kingdom that happens when we don't all do what we should.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. I really do think, like, if you're talking about you're praying in your room by yourself, that is, it's like what needs to happen. What needs to happen? What needs to happen is it becomes part of that if you're paying attention to that. And every one of these lines has a lot to it. So I actually would like to pause in the middle of the Lord's Prayer since we're at I just did look at the clock, and there really is a lot to the next few lines that are worthy of our time and attention. So I'll mark where we are. Next week is Valentine's Day, and I assume nobody would want to do that, but we are scheduled. I didn't know we wouldn't get all the way through, but I knew we might not. So I've got this room booked for the Monday after the next Monday. So go have a good Valentine's Day. and then
Thank
we'll
you.
have a follow-up session on the next Monday. So, and if you don't have a significant other, remember Oscar Wilde said, a lifelong love affair is to love yourself. So that's also a Valentine's Day tradition. So, and you can do that even if you do have a significant other. Yeah.
And it should be the same Zoom link next time, so you shouldn't have any problems.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.